So in just a couple minutes, I want to give you a whole broad picture of what this whole 8-week class is going to look like, okay? So we're going to have it in different modules. Each module's about a week, maybe 2 weeks long. Most of them are 1 week though. The last one's going to be 2 weeks. But the very first week is going to be settling in, get to know each other, and you're going to look at what humanities is. Remember, the name of this title of this class is Humanities Through Film. So first you need to understand what is humanities and how does film fit into that study. So really broadly, if you think of archaeology, which is the study of humans' remains and different archaeological evidence to find remains of people and societies or certain animals or what's happening in a culture, you're digging under the ground to find things, artifacts. In that same way, we're going to look at movies like that. We're going to look at movies as if they're an artifact of the past, artifact to understand society and individuals. And so we're going to look and understand certain tools in humanities to then be applied to looking at films so that we could get ourselves in, like, back in the future. So, like, we're going to get into a time traveler's mindset to go back at the time when people were watching that movie for the first time and what the world was like around them. Now, that's going to be our journey week after week. But then when we get to the 21st century, which is our current time, we're going to use those same tools, but we're going to look at different parts of American society and film, look at things that are happening in the world around us and how that's being reflected in film. So that first week is so important because we're going to look at how certain tools can be applied in humanities that will be used throughout this class. So really be sure to take your time on that module. Then we're going to look at the earliest film, the very beginnings of film, black and white, Edison's revolution of the film industry and how that starts to take off in New York, in the East Coast, and then eventually moving west because the weather's better in a place called Hollywood. And then Hollywood starts to take shape and create a different type of movie experience. And that's going to continue to change throughout the decades up until now. So that beginning stage we're going to look at. And that's going to also go with our very first movie, which is a black and white film with Charlie Chaplin, which is a comedy called City Lights. And if you've never seen a black and white film, we're going to go through it. I think out of the whole class, most people at the end of it say they're most surprised with this film, that they actually like it. So give yourself a chance to get into that first film. It's a different type of movie experience. Certainly now when we're watching most of our stuff on smartphones, this you're going to have on a screen. Really allow yourself not to have too many distractions, but it really allows you to go back in time to some of the earliest film experiences. And then we're going to go into moving along with the timeline and from the era of the Depression, where the City Lights comes out of, moving to World War II and how this, what I call wartime Hollywood, really takes shape. And you're going to see a wonderful film, which was a love film, but it's also arguably a wartime film, and you're going to understand why when we get to that, called Casablanca, a classic. If you've seen it before, you're going to see it in a whole different way with this specific module, looking at wartime Hollywood. Then after the war, we get into the Cold War and this sort of these anxieties that happened between Russia and the United States, the West, Europe, and communism, and the scare for nuclear war, and all these things that was a huge part of the 60s and might be starting to be echoed again in the 21st century. But you're going to see how that also affects movies, specifically genre of cowboys and Indian movies, these Westerns. But we're going to turn this tide of that, and we're going to look not at the cowboy side in Westerns, but the Native American side. And we're going to watch a great documentary called Real Injun that looks at the development of Native American stereotypes and how that identity created in film really has sort of this reflection in the Native American culture today and how people sort of see Native Americans. So that's going to be a really powerful documentary we're going to explore together. And then moving along, in the 60s and 70s, Hollywood changes to what is known as New Hollywood. And that's looking at also, if you think of the civil rights movements that are going on, the anti-war movement, the American Indian movement, the Latino movement, there's all kinds of changes happening around the United States, really politically conscious, and that reflects itself into Hollywood, and it really starts to change Hollywood and New Hollywood. At the same time, there's a counter of that that's really trying to sort of maintain the values of sort of the old conservative way film and the values they're putting in that you see in Casablanca. That's going to be a big part of that movie earlier. And you're going to see this conflict in Hollywood between New Hollywood, sort of these civil rights movements and agendas that are happening to sort of make a change and political consciousness. And there's going to be a backlash against that as well. So there's certain movies at that time that are definitely in response to this sort of changes that are happening within Hollywood. It's an interesting time, and it brings out a lot of amazing movies that you have to check out. And we're going to look at one called Harold and Maude. And it's an interesting one because we're really going to reflect and look at some of these themes that are really, first time coming on the screen that deal with hard issues like suicide and love and establishments and how we interact in society. So that's all part of this film of New Hollywood. And then we're going to move into some thematic stuff, and we're going to look at, in general, something like why we love medieval movies. Medievalism is what it's called. Why we love movies like, that have knights and things like Game of Thrones. And then arguably also things like Star Wars. That's very much underneath of it all, even though it's futuristic and fantasy in space. Underneath it all, it's very much a medieval theme with knights and all these things coming into play. So we're going to explore the theme of medievalism and medieval films, which is going to be fascinating. I think you'll like that one. We're going to look at an older movie, and it's a fun movie called A Knight's Tale. And then after that, we get to explore, we're going to get into the 21st century, and we're going to start looking at more themes, and you get to take the reins of a film that you get to want to watch that really sort of reflects the culture today in the 21st century. And that's going to be a project, not a final, but it's going to be a project to end the class. Now that brings me to the last point, that there is no final in this class. There's no exams, but each week you're going to be expected to do quite a bit of writing, because you're going to watch movies and you're going to have to write about them in discussion groups, and you're going to have to discuss other people's, because it's so important to see other people's perspectives in watching these movies, because everyone's going to be watching the same movie. You're going to be in a group of 10 people, and every single person's going to see something different in that film. And the only way to really understand that and to see that together is by reading what other people have to say. So what you have to say is so important, and how you view it is incredibly important. There's no real right or wrong way to do that. What's wrong is if you just don't give evidence, if you just don't do the assignments, if you don't write enough. If you do that, if you do write the assignments, if you do enough, if you comment on other people's, you're going to rock this class. And I think you're going to have fun in the journey. So as you can see, we're going to travel through the timeline of the United States history and how film changes and morphs in that, and how we can see society through those films. But it really is a lot of your reflection as well of how you see things, how you see the material, and how what you learn each week is applied to the movies you're going to watch. All right, so that's a good overview. Don't worry, we're going to go through it bit by bit, week by week in each module. But 8 weeks goes by fast, so be sure you give yourself time to watch the movies, to do the material, to understand how the material for the week is applied to the movie you're going to watch. There's a very specific reason for all these things. And but then take your time to write the assignments, the discussion posts. And I think you'll enjoy the journey. Now, most of all, you can always comment to me. You can email to me if you have any questions. Throughout the class, there's going to be some anonymous surveys. They truly are anonymous. I don't know what you say on them, so you can say whatever you want. But that helps me to understand how the class is doing and what's working, what's not working. That's really, really important to me. So in this journey, you're taking the reins a lot of the way, but I hope you enjoy the learning process as you explore films through the study of humanities. Thank you so much, and enjoy the class.